everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Wellness Wednesdays with Stephanie. My name is Stephanie Buckland, and I am very, very happy to be interviewing my friend and colleague, Lisa Stewart, today. And we're going to dive into a conversation that is very near and dear to my heart. So, Lisa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk about your journey. I would love for you to give us a little introduction of who you are, what you're up to in the world, and what kind of magic you're making for our community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Hey, Mystics, Mages, and Muggles. I am Lisa Stewart of Co-Create Magick. I'm a creative mixed medium, a seer, a psychic, and energy worker. I work with my angels, my ancestors, and my guides, oracle cards, and other divination tools to co-create with spirit. It's my mission to help mystics find the courage to co-create their magic to grow their income and their dreams. I'm also an intuitive business guide, designer, inventor, and author. I've got over 30 years of business experience helping Fortune 100 companies, nonprofits, small businesses with their brand development, their messaging, their marketing, visual idea like logos and layouts, websites, and apps. Now, what I'm working on currently, just briefly, is a new membership site called Mystic Makers Business Portal. It's everything that you need to quickly build your business to become a recognized authority and guide. And I'm so excited to have launched this past month because it's something that my ancestors have been telling me for a long while now. And I finally listened back in the spring, and I'm like, should I open a membership site? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, whoa, okay, all right. So the past 4 months, I have been just head down working on building the structure for mystics as well as creatives, because I find that mystics often have trouble selling themselves, selling their services to other people, right? And when that happens, they tend to falter, and then they get confused and they're like, oh, this isn't for me. Business isn't for me. And I'm telling you, business is for you if that's the path you want to choose. And I can help you along the way.
Beautiful. Yeah, I heard about your portal and I was like, yes, sign me up. I have had struggles as a psychic, and that's actually one of the reasons I'm excited about this conversation today, because we're talking about your journey to awakening to your spiritual nature. And I've had quite a journey myself, so I'm just excited to gush and share about this. So when do you think it began for you?
That's a fun question because I've been intuitive my entire life. I borrowed my first book from the library when I was 5 years old, and it was on witches. And of course, my stepdad kind of looked at me with a little bit of concern. He's like, you sure you don't want anything else? I'm like, nope. I clutched onto this little book and I'm like, this is what I want. And of course, the librarian kind of bends over the counter at me and she goes, you chose wisely. And I'm like, thank you, I know. And so I think for me, that was about remembering, right? And then in addition to that, I also had an invisible friend. He was tall. I don't know if he was an elemental or maybe even a Sasquatch, but he was tall. He was like 7 feet tall. His head touched the ceiling and he had big horns. And then, of course, when he introduced himself to me, he had male junk. And I told him adult males can't show their junk to little girls, so he has to wear boxer shorts. So I called him Mr. Bullwinkle, and Mr. Bullwinkle wore white boxer shorts with large polka dots on them. So he always wore polka dotted skivvies, were the names that we gave him. So yeah, Mr. Bullwinkle, he accompanied me everywhere, even to the bowling alley. And he was very protective and just hung out with me for several years.
Wow, that's so cool. I hadn't thought of it for the longest time, but when you said imaginary friend, when I was 5, I had imagined an imaginary friend named Stephanie. And
Oh,
I remember that. I think it's common among intuitives and psychics to have these what we call imaginary friends, because we don't really have a name for them when we're 5, you know? Um, but
Unless you're watching Rocky and Bullwinkle, right? And then you just
right.
assign one because he looks like that. Yeah,
But I was in an environment where it was okay to have psychic experiences because my mom
nice.
made it okay, you know? So how was that experience in your childhood? With where you were raised and your parents, how did they react to your psychic skills?
Well, mixed results, right? They weren't real crazy about Mr. Bullwinkle. When we left him at the bowling alley one day, I was 5 or 6 years old, and we're on our way home, and I'm like, Mom, Mr. Bullwinkle, he's not in the car with us. And Mom's like, he'll find his way home, right? So she wasn't really encouraging about that. So 3 days later, we're all sitting around the dinner table, and I see Mr. Bullwinkle pop up behind my dad and my brothers in the corner. And I'm like, oh, he's back. And of course, all the forks drop on the plates, right? So I kind of started keeping some of the visuals to myself, but that didn't stop me from exploring. I would devour ESP books from Edgar Casey and J.B. Ryan, right? In my teens, whatever I could get my hands on. I devoured those texts. And when I learned that the Ryan Research Center was attached to Duke University, I made it my mission to move to North Carolina to get to the research center. I grew up in Michigan. And so we had lots of ghosts and spirit activity in the house and around the property. And
Mhm.
I just want to touch on this a little bit for your viewers. And that is, a lot of people feel like if it's an old house, it should have ghosts. If it's a new house, it doesn't have any spirits or activity. Nothing could be further from the truth. My dad built that house, and I helped him. As a kid, we'd go out every weekend and he'd give me a hammer and nails, and I was pretending to help him. But yeah, we had our own collection of spirits there. And there was one spirit that followed me around for many years. Um, and, lots of things like I wasn't crazy about the hallway, or I wasn't crazy about the bathroom at night because I would see things, things, just horrible, nasty little creatures that would just scare the dickens out of me, right?
Mhm.
But that didn't stop me. I still pursued my experience with intuition and ESP. But what I didn't know is that I could use it as a tool. I thought it was hit or miss. I thought it was, oh, here it comes and there it goes, right? So, like, for
Mhm.
instance, when friends in middle school would get sick, I'd have this dream that a guy friend of mine had severe abdominal pain. Next day, I go to school and I'm like, hey, where's Ken? And everybody's like, oh, well, he went to the hospital last night. He had appendicitis. And I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, okay, right. Interesting. Okay. Didn't say too much to my friends about that. But yeah, so then I learned that I would get severe headaches in high school and in college. And I didn't understand why, but I also could hear voices on top of voices, right? So when you're walking
Mhm.
down the high school corridors and you've got your students on either side of you sitting next to open lockers talking amongst themselves, I can also hear other chatter going on, the things they'd like to say but they can't say, right? Those kinds of
Mhm.
things. And it just, oh, it would drive me nuts, and I just couldn't wait to return home or into a quiet space to be the introvert that I love to be.
Yeah, I can imagine. I had some experiences in my childhood where ghosts interacted with me. I think one of the most impactful ones was when I was 23 and I woke up to a room full of ghosts.
Hmm.
And I thought, like, I was scared. I
Yeah.
didn't know what they were doing there. And I was like, why are you here? You're freaking me out. And as soon as I turned the light on, they disappeared. But
Right.
that room had like 12 adults in it. I was
Hmm.
23 years old and just coming into my psychic skills.
Hmm.
And I didn't know what the hell that was. I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
knew at the time I was living near a cemetery. So
Mm.
my theory was that they were ghosts that could feel my sensitivity and they were just
Hmm.
coming to see whether or not they
Yep.
could talk with me.
Ooh, a beacon. Yeah.
Which actually ties back to the ghost showing up in a brand new build,
Mhm.
because I believe that spirits can sense us when we're sensitive. They
Right.
know. And whether or
Yeah.
not you know or not,
Yeah.
they know. They can
Yeah.
tell that you can feel them. And so they show up and they're like, okay, can this
Mhm.
person communicate with me? Because I
Mhm.
think that they're looking for ways to
Yeah.
communicate. That's why they're
Absolutely.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think going back to the new builds, right? I think that the energy of the land, when we learned that the land, the original deed was from President Adams. I'm not sure which Adams, but also it was a former reservation for First Nation Indians. So we found a lot of arrowheads, and we found a lot of old prescription bottles, the old cobalt blue and the amber bottles for medicine bottles and things like that. So I'm not sure if it was the same time frame, but if soldiers hung out there, right? So maybe it was, um, year after year, layers of inhabitants over time, because the fascinating story about the land that we were on, my mom and dad bought this property. It was 16 acres and it was in the middle of 64 acres. So imagine fields and cornfields on either side of us with a river behind us that kind of scalloped around the house. And the river was probably, took about a good 5-minute walk. I mean, you could see it from the kitchen window, but it took a good 5 minutes to get there, especially when you're trying to climb over weeds and so forth. The houses across the street from us would often have an apparition of a fully dressed Indian chief. And the fully dressed Indian chief would show up in the middle of the night, standing in the living room, watching over any of the guests that were laying on the couch. Many times the guests were teenage boys. When they'd wake up, they'd see this fully headdressed Indian standing at the foot of the couch, going, just standing there, observing them. I can't tell you how many times we've heard the stories of the kids jumping out of the couch, out the front door, half naked, going, I'm not going back in. Give me my clothes. Give me my clothes. You know what I just saw? So there were lots of interesting communication and activities going on between three houses. So I found that interesting. And so the
That is
stories, I always lived for those stories. So that wasn't unusual to us.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd love to hear a little more about your education in North Carolina. That's got to be a challenging area to be a psychic.
Yeah, it really is, because it's one of those things where a friend in corporate America said, "Hey, Lise, so I am a member of Rhine Research Center." And we start talking about ESP, and I'm like, "Oh, I know That's why I moved down here." And so we kind of talked quietly, because you don't talk about that out loud in front of Christians. So we decided we would go take these classes together, and they might be like on a Thursday night or a Saturday morning. And lo and behold, it wasn't until I came out of the closet 3 4 years ago that I now recognize what they were teaching me. When in my 20s, right? They were teaching me energy healing, they were teaching me remote viewing and all kinds of other things. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. But still, I thought it was hit or miss. Um,
Right.
when my husband and I met in 2001, I was still on their membership email list. A few years later, well, actually, I'm going to go back and talk about my husband for a minute. My past boyfriends and so forth, I would tell them my proclivities, my talents, and they're like, "Sure, okay, yeah, I'm hip with that." Until they weren't, right? Until they were doing devious things, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, I'm going to catch you in a lie." And they're like, "Oh no, no," and then gaslit happens, and I'm like, "Okay, we just need to part our ways, and I need to find somebody who will appreciate me 100%." So when my partner and I met, within 2 weeks, I'm like, okay, we need to have a talk. There's something about me you need to know, and you need to get on board with it. If you are not 100% on board with it, and I will know, we're just going to continue as friends. We are not going to take this any further, because we met on Match.com for the pure reason of forming a relationship, right? Getting to know each other as friends and then forming a relationship. And when I told him, he's like, sure, okay. And I felt into it, and I'm like, okay, he's cool with this. Not knowing I was feeling into it, right? Still not recognizing what I could do.
Right.
So 2 or 3 years later, Ryan Research Center sends out a broadcast and said, we want to test you. Would you like to be a participant in our testing? So talk to my partner, and I'm like, I would really love to do this, but I need you to accompany me, because they're going to set us in 2 different rooms and they're going to be soundproof. Would you like to do this with me? And he's like, yeah, sure. So we scheduled time. It's, an afternoon in August, and it was a hell of a good time. He sat in one room, I sat in another, in these big, comfortable lazy boy chairs. And I was completely in the dark, and I had headphones on, so I couldn't hear anything except his voice. He would watch videos that were cued by the operator on the outside of the rooms. And so she'd show a video and he'd explain things. But actually, I take that back. I couldn't hear his voice. I would hear her saying, okay, now we're going to watch another video. So the exercise was to see or hear or pull in anything that I could through my hyper senses, right? To kind of figure out what it was he was seeing. So I would say, I see fire, I see a log, I see motion, I see a sawtooth saw, like a circular saw, things like that. And so he would be in the other room screaming, but I couldn't hear him. And I would be on the microphone telling the operator what I'm seeing. And it was interesting because she had 4 videos queued up, but she only showed me one. I told her all 4. And so when we came out of our rooms, she's like, you are one of the strongest people we have ever tested. And I'm like, ooh, really? So he and I kept that cloak. We didn't tell his parents. His father was an Episcopal priest, and he was very open. I would ask him about things like, how do you reconcile science with religion? So we'd have some discussions. His mom was just a little bit judgmental. So I'm like, I'm just going to keep it zipped, right? But it was really difficult because there were things that she would say and I could anticipate. So I just, really kept things on the down low. So when people would ask me, how did you know that? It was like, it's a hunch, just a hunch, right?
Oh my goodness. What an experience. So when did you actually come out of the spiritual closet?
Interestingly enough, when this airs, which I think you said it's going to be October, maybe sometime, it will be 4 years October.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Andrew and I actually, when Andrew was working for the first version of his company before his company was bought and taken over by another larger conglomerate, he and his colleagues had scheduled to go to London for a week because they wanted to work on some marketing strategy, and that was their focus for the week. And everybody said, bring Lisa along. And I'm like, yes, right? So I toured London the entire week alone. And so I took Harry Potter walks, right? When J.K. Rowling was inspired by Watkins Bookstore, which is the London's oldest occult bookstore there in London. And that walk with J.K. Rowling and the different areas that she hit when she was inspired to write the stories, and other supernatural walks that we took really inspired me because I felt it was so natural for me to be in that energy. And I'm like, this just feels really comfortable. I want more of this. So when we came home, a week later, I was compelled, and I don't know why. I said, I need to go to the local New Age bookstore and I want to pick up a pack of tarot cards. I don't know why. I don't know how to use tarot. I've never used tarot. Tarot's always scared me, but I want a pack of tarot cards. Let's just do this. And he's like, okay, sure. So we go into the store, and like a lot of people say, the tarot cards just jumped out at them. For me, they didn't jump out, right? But they glowed, amongst all the other cards on the shelf. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to grab that one. That one says hello. All right, we're going to do that. Still not recognizing the connection that I'm having with these cards. We get in the car. I've got the cards on my lap. And I say, well, I guess the universe wants me to do this. And holy smoke, my body just lit up. It tingled like I have never experienced. And I still didn't know the phrase clairsentient, right? But I'm like, I feel things, and it's like the whole universe just gathered around me going, yay, she's on, we've tapped her on, she's embracing this. And that for me was like a magnanimous moment, recognizing that I am doing the right thing. So yeah, 4 years ago, and it's been quite the journey since.
Absolutely. I think we've been connected for what, at least 2 of those years.
I think
Sounds about right.
yeah.
And I've watched you develop things and grow your business and become a leader in this industry. And it's been so beautiful to watch.
Thank you.
I would love for you to talk about your business a little bit.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. So kind of going back really quickly when I was 7 years old, again, it was remembering, right? And for me, it was the first time I developed a product line. And it didn't stop from there. And I learned about design, I learned about graphic design, I learned about visual design, interior design, all kinds of modalities about design. And I loved it all. So I went to school for design and also fine art, because I also recognized, and I couldn't figure out why, that my natural talent was illustration. It was something I didn't have to work at. It came natural. I can draw anything, and I've got the perspective down. And to me, it's kind of like, do you remember the movie Made in Heaven with Timothy Hutton and the woman from Top Gear? When he arrives in heaven, he dies, he goes to heaven, and he comes back for a second chance. But when he's in heaven, he's granted a shovel, and he doesn't know why he needs to use this shovel. And that was a tool that he needed to explore his spirituality as well as his practical mundane life. And for me, that's illustration. Illustration is a tool for me. So moving forward, working in corporate America for 15 years and exploring design, right? Exploring graphic design, exploring logos and layouts, exploring website design, and also then UI and UX, right? The usability of, web apps and kiosk apps and things like that. So from desktop to virtual. I was also freelancing at the time and helping other designers, artists, and even small businesses with their websites. And when I would talk to them about what they wanted their website to do for them, I would ask them, do you have design guidelines? And they're like, no, what's that? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's walk backwards a little bit. Do you have any brand development done? Have you done your messaging? Do you know what your values are and your pillars and your positioning? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay. And I quickly found that small businesses, no matter who you are, all need brand development in order to tell people who you are, what you do, and who you serve. And all of these exercises of doing the brand messaging helps then to inform what's going to go on your website, the images that you're going to use, the colors that you're going to use, even to the fonts. Is it going to be serif? Is it going to be sans serif? What are some of the descriptive words that you're going to use? And how are you going to showcase the best of what you do so that people resonate with you and want to buy from you? So going through this whole line of, from end to end work, from brand development to website design. It was in the early aughts when Microsoft decided to come out with Front Page. And then everybody just jumped ship. They're like, we don't need your services. I've got front page. And it was so debilitating. I'm like, but you don't understand. Front page isn't the end all be all. You still need brand development. You still need brand messaging. And they're like, no, 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 I got this. I got this. And I'm like, okay. So at that point, I'm like, all right, now what do I do? And I knew that I needed to take advantage of my fine art degree. I'd already exercised so much time, and I loved every minute of it, and I still do, design, from visual design, website design, and all of that in between. But this was the fascinating part. When my partner and I met in 2001, February, March, it was in May, and I distinctly remember this. And this is when I started to co-create and manifest, and I didn't know I was doing any of this. I told him, I said, since customers and clients are so bent on using this third-party platform, which is Front Page, and leaving me out of the ability to help them make sound decisions, I really need to capitalize on my fine art degree. I want to build another product line. I don't know what that is, but I want it to encapsulate everything I already know. My illustration, take advantage of that. What does that look like? I've taken watercolor, I've taken oil painting, lithography, printmaking. I've taken all of it. I love all of it, but what is going to transpire for me? Well, fast forward to December. Andrew's parents come down for the holidays, and we decide to have movie night. And if you remember back in the 90s and the early 2000s, when we had those giant TVs that sat on the floor, those giant screens, he had one of those in the basement of his house. And at that point, I had just moved in, and his parents were like so happy. Andrew's got a girlfriend, and we've got 3 kittens. Well, we turn the lights down low, and his mother is knitting. She's knitting a little blanket. Well, we've got 2 8-month-old tabby cats. And when she drops the ball of yarn, Bacchus goes running across the floor to capture the ball of yarn, as kittens do. The TV, the light from the TV shone on his back and highlighted from tail to ear. And I got this aha moment. And I'm like, hold on a second, guys, can you pause the movie? I need to go get my sketchbook. And Andrew's like, yeah, sure. So his dad is sitting to the right of me in a separate chair, and he's as big and gentle as Hagrid. So I'm crawling over him, and I'm like, excuse me. He's like, sure, go ahead. And I grab my sketchbook, come back, sit down, and I start creating gesture drawings of cats and all their capricious nature and their sinuous line of how they move. And as I'm just sketching down as fast as I can, as furiously as I can, Andrew looks over and he goes, I think you've got something. And I'm like, you know what? I think I do too. At which point the line just grew. So over the next few years, I created what's called calligraphy cats. And they are gesture drawings with brush and ink. And so they're just very fluid and very simple. And I've been able to capture the volume of the cat and the motion and movement of the cat in this series. And so I went on and I created more cats, more dogs, more inanimate objects like garden tools and things like that. And I started to license my work with manufacturers as well as build my own product. So over the next 15 years, that's what we did. We built my small empire with art on it. And it was part of that co-creation process that I didn't recognize I was actually doing with Spirit. And whenever I would get into the flow of making, right, then suddenly I would get these intuitive hits. It's like, ooh, go this way, ooh, go this way. So it's almost kind of like if you're kayaking and you're just kind of moving with the river, right? And you're not moving against it. You're just like, let's just flow. Let's just figure this out and have fun with it. And that's how I built many of my products. And over time then, right, my products got featured in local news, national news, in movies. I even got to create a mask for a superhero. I love superheroes anyway. But then as well, I was able to pen several articles for industry publications and just had a good time doing all of that. And then at which point we found ourselves stuck, especially in North Carolina, because I still wasn't living my truth, right? I wasn't able to share 100% of who I am, that intuitive nature. I'd have customers walk into the shop and, you know, I could read them. They would come through and they would be shopping for corporate gifts. And they'd say, oh, you've got checkbook covers. That's interesting. And I'd read them and I'm like, I also have passport covers. And they're like, oh, how did you know? And I'm like, it's a hunch, right? So I felt like Mary Poppins in that shop. It's like, oh, wait a minute. You know what? I think you're going to like something over here in this corner. So yeah, just being able to be in that environment with a client, a customer who just wants to explore, I was able to create this energy bubble that allowed me to expand and discover everything that's possible. So that's really the crux of how I started my business.
So when did you pivot to more of a spiritual business?
Good question. When we moved out here to Seattle, I said, okay, well, I guess I will help other businesses with their websites and their logos and their branding and things like that, because we couldn't find a space to make. It was just too cost prohibitive. So I really had to pivot fast, pivot hard. So let's go back, help people with websites and all of that. And it was tough, again, because I couldn't share 100% of me, because again, talking with clients, they would tend to get a little fearful because they're like, how did you know that? And I'm like, it was a hunch. Again, it was always a freaking hunch. And I wanted to be able to say, I really feel that you should go in this direction because it's going to be much easier for you. My intuitive hit says blah, blah, blah. But I still didn't know how to articulate that until I felt like I was going through the dark night of the soul we moved out here in 2016, I think. And so 17, 18, 19 is when I was really, I was feeling the brain fog and feeling lost and just like, I don't know what to do. But I still did a little bit of making. And when we went to London and I picked up the tarot cards, I started playing with them. And suddenly things just started to open up. I was starting to get these messages and I'd write them down. I'd, choose a card a day and I'd write down the message and journal it a little bit. And then as I did that, I started looking up keywords like witch and there were some other keywords, intuition, psychic, things like that. And so I'd find Facebook groups and so forth. And it wasn't until a year later that I started to look up the word light worker. And I'm like, oh, and then what's the difference between witch and light worker? And I'm like, I love the label of witch. And I always loved, Samantha in Bewitched and all the other stories and so forth that, I could watch and absorb. But I was thinking, I wonder if I'm more of a light worker than a witch. And then, of course, it was a matter of getting to know other people in the metaphysical community and then learning about shamanism and then recognizing that they were a lot like creatives. And I said this back in the very beginning, creatives have a really difficult time talking about their product because they want to dive into what it is they do and how they do it. And mystics are no different, right? I can do this modality and this modality and this modality. And it's like, that's great. But how does that help the customer? And I quickly realized that mystics needed my help. And because I am a mystic myself, right? And now coming out of the closet, I understand that there are metaphysical tools I can use as well as the practical mundane tools. So I can match them and weave them together to to create a holistic approach to my business.
That's beautiful. I am so excited for the future of your business and what you're creating, Lisa.
Thank you.
Oh, my goodness. Well, now, is there any other hits of inspiration or messages that you want to leave with the audience?
I think two things, really. And that is my mission, as I mentioned earlier, which is to help people find the courage to co-create. Originally, it was find the courage to create, but now that I've come out of the closet, it's co-create. Mm-hmm. If you can just get quiet a couple of times a day, even for a minute, and just ask, what does my heart say? What messages do my guides have for me. Just sit and breathe in through your heart. You're going to start to feel that open up, and you're going to learn that that's the easy path, because many of us, our ego gets in the way and we're too busy fighting against the ego, going, I should be doing this, I should be doing this, versus I'd rather do this. When you get out of the head and back into the heart, you discover this is the easy path. This is the flow. This is me in a kayak as I'm just kind of traversing the waves and feeling what my soul wants me to do, what I came here to do. So that would be the first one. The second one would be to speak up, because I know that many of us, right, have, when we are in tune with our past lives and the fear that we bring forward, whether it was through drowning, whether it was through burning at the stake, or any of those other horrific experiences that we've had in the past, know that it's okay for self-expression today. Now, if it doesn't feel good to you to come out to your family and friends, find a group that will allow you to be yourself, so that way you can start to feel your power and your sovereignty. Once you start to feel that, then you're going to understand what boundaries are, so that way you can start to come out a little bit to your family, but in small doses, and you'll know how to protect yourself if they don't fully expect or accept you for who you are.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa.
You bet. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am so excited to share this. I think that the information that you shared about your path is going to be very important for some of these newly awakened people that are out there really having a challenge with their psychic abilities and what they can do. So thank you. Thank you for being a beacon of light.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for so much for having me on your podcast. I'm excited.
Yay.